Kia ora e te whānau, haere mai, and welcome to Wānanga at our Wānanga, Evidence and Ideas. This is a webinar series that's designed to inspire conversations across and among our AUT staff here at Te Wānanga Aranui o Tamaki Makaurau. Ko Amber Older aho. I'm the communications manager for the Faculty of Business, Economics and Law. And this morning we're talking about how to maintain momentum in the marathon of COVID-19. We're now pretty aware that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So in a minute, I will introduce our panelists and they'll share their knowledge and expertise over the next hour or so, 45 minutes or so, about how we can do better longer and how we can build a strong community in these pandemic times. First, just quickly, the housekeeping, as is par for the course these days. Your microphones are muted, your cameras are off, that just so we can keep things running to time. Our panelists will each speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll take questions at the end. So please do send through your questions using the chat box feature, and I'll put those to our presenters at the end of their presentations. And also we will send through a link of this recorded session and some information about the resources and tips that we'll be talking about over the next little while. So don't worry about trying to take down notes and copy links. We'll get that information to you. So to our panelists, all from the business school, Te Kura Kaipakihi. We have Associate Professor Ella Henry, who is a scholar of Maori and Indigenous culture, entrepreneurship, and business management, and she's the Director of Maori Advancement for the Business School. We have Professor Helena Cooper-Thomas, who specializes in organizational behavior with a particular focus on the experience of work, both for individuals and organizations. And we have Lena Waizenegger, who's with the Department of Business Information Systems, and she's published new research that can really teach us a lot about what we've learned from lockdown version 1 and how we can do it better now and next time and next time. Because let's face it, it does seem inevitable that the world will move in and out of some form of lockdown for the foreseeable, at least until we get a vaccine. And so while much of the conversation is rightly on health and the economy, those kind of conversations are inextricably intertwined with our sense of community. So we want to talk today about how do we build and maintain and grow a safe, strong, and sustainable community in the face of COVID-19. So for us here at AUT and in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the role of biculturalism is key to any conversation about community. That's true in times of pandemic too, and it's particularly true during Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, Māori Language Week. So here to tell us some more about this with her very informed perspectives, Kia ora, Ella Henry. With your mute button off, please.
Again. Sorry, kia ora, I te timatanga me mihi atu kia koutou katoa, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa. I begin this greeting in my language by greeting not only those who I can see on screen, but all of you who choose to join us today, because that is a fundamental component not only of Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, but also of my identity and what I hope I bring to this discussion as a Māori person and a Māori speaker, albeit not a fabulous Māori speaker. So I've been asked to talk about biculturalism, and I wanted to take a step back because the notion has become quite fraught over the recent decades, from when it was first coined and used much more in the 1970s and 80s, when, to be perfectly frank, New Zealand did basically comprise of predominantly two set and distinct cultures, that of Māori culture and that of British culture, which became part of New Zealand society after the signing of the treaty. And so the discussions around biculturalism have really very much come from our origins as a new state created in 1840 through the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. But I like to think of biculturalism through a slightly different lens, and I think that, I hope, helps further discussion in our own institution, and that is to recognise that the treaty was actually a compact between two nations. The Māori nation, had been acknowledged by the British Crown in 1836 when they recognised our flag. So two nations rather than two cultures signed the treaty, and I think that that's a useful way to move forward in terms of thinking about how we work and interact together. So for me, those two nations comprise tangata whenua, the nation of Māori that it was and in existence prior to the Treaty of Waitangi, and what I call tangata tiriti, the nation that was created because of the treaty. So the treaty, I think, is very important for all of us because it helps define our relationship with each other and with this country. Tangata whenua and tangata tiriti are two nations bound together in what I think of as a very unique and distinctive relationship, which many other new nations, and we are a new nation. We fit within the raft of ex-colonies, if you like to think of it that way, like the United States and Canada and Australia, much of Latin America, much of Asia, much of Africa, who are relatively new nations wrestling with identity. And I believe that what we have that's unique and distinctive about us as New Zealand is that this treaty gives all of us a raison d'etre, a reason to be here, a validation of our identity that is distinct to us as New Zealanders. And so when I talk about enhancing a bicultural environment, I'm working on the premise that we are still two nations of people, even though we are woven together via marriage, via whakapapa, via a range of social relationships. Those two nations, the tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, are still wrestling with how we work more effectively together. And I say this at a time when Māori still represent some of the most disadvantaged in our country. So what do we as a university, as an institution, do to enact biculturalism and a bicultural environment? And I like to draw on traditional Māori values and philosophy to help underpin my thinking around these ideas. And I would urge a call for mutual respect and an application of the treaty principles, the principle of partnership, the principle of participation, and the principle of protection. Those, though they were not articulated specifically in the treaty, are actually the philosophical values that underpin the idea of us living together in some kind of harmonious relationship. So what might that mean for each of us within AUT in terms of that? Well, I would urge all of us to, and I know that this is a very stressful time, it's a busy time, even though it doesn't seem like it's busy. We're doing a lot more head work, we're doing a lot more online and digital work. So how do we then weave those principles of partnership, protection and participation into our daily lives? For me as a Māori, I would like to think that people take an interest in contributing to the revitalisation of Māori language and culture, because that too is something that is a distinctive feature of New Zealand society. It's an enriching feature, and you only know, as somebody who travels regularly, that when you go overseas and you meet other New Zealanders, it's only a matter of time before you start using Māori language or engage in some sort of cultural activity that brings you closer to home. So this is not something that I'm saying is a language just for Māori. It is a language that is distinct and unique for this whole country. And also we can think about how we enact some of the tikanga of the Māori culture, like manaakitanga. The expression be kind is an essence of manaakitanga and generosity. The ethic or the tikanga of kaitiakitanga, of stewardship, of taking care of each other. Even the tikanga of wairua, of spirituality. And I'm not saying that this is demarcated to one particular religion, but the soul, the spirit, is the one part of us that often gets neglected in our haste to be organised and to be active, but actually being able to engage in things that replenish our spiritual sense, our soul, our wairua, is as important as taking care of each other personally. And of course the notion of aroha, which is much bigger than love. It's about empathy in these particularly troubled times, because those tikanga are really just Māori words for what any healthy, sustainable society does and what it practices to maintain social cohesion and social well-being in a very holistic way. It is not just the well-being of our bodies that is at stake at the moment. It is the well-being of our minds. It is the well-being of our spirits. It's the sort of thing that's woven into the work that the inimitable Professor Mason Dury coined when he talked about the whare tapawha, the house with four walls. And when those four walls are strong, the body, the emotions, the intellect and the soul and the family, then the individual as well. So these are the things that I would like to bring to the attention of my colleagues across AUT as being potential ways of gaining some more form of well-being and being centred and being part of a bigger entity than just us as individuals, which comes for me from being a Māori. I know that I'm never alone. I have my ancestors on my shoulders. I have my unborn descendants laid out in front of me, and I have my family and my kinship ties around me. That strengthens me. And it reminds me that my mother, born in 1919, survived a war, you know, a plague in 1919, a depression in the 1930s, and still managed a sense of humour, albeit wicked, as she progressed through her life. I remember my ancestors, I remember my elders, because they give me the strength to move forward. So what I would like to close on for this discussion is use this time, if you have, to make yourself open to learning a little bit more about this culture that you share with us if you are not Māori, or if you are Māori, how to share our culture through use of the language, through application of the culture and the ideas, because I think that really is how we build resilience over the long haul, is having strong communities, strong ties, and a strong sense of taking care of each other, especially during Te Wiki or Te Reo Māori. So I have another slide. Some of the points that I've made here are on a slide, and there is also some direct links for those of you who want to go on and learn a little bit more, who may not necessarily have known what a treasure trove of resources that we already have here on our campus in Te Arapautama, the Faculty of Māori Development, and through the work of some of the lecturers. And if I was really technically adroit, I would push the share button and you would be able to see them. But clearly I am not. Ergo, I shall pass it over to somebody else who may know how to share those slides, but if you do want access to them, they are available online, and they really just reiterate the points that I made. I wish you all absolutely well in these troubled times. I wish you all and your families that you are kaha, be strong, kia kaha, kia haumaru, be safe. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Ella. Thank you so much. Really interesting to think about how your approach with biculturalism, binationalism, can really help inform this whole sense of well-being, which is becoming more and more of a priority in these uncertain times. And that really segues very smoothly into the work of Professor Helena Cooper-Thomas. Her research looks at the increasingly accepted concept in the contemporary times, in the contemporary world, Western world, of well-being, both for individuals and for organizations. So perhaps, Helena, we can hand over to you to pick up where Ella has led this conversation.
Kia ora tātou, ko Helena Cooper-Thomas, tōku ingoa. Thank you very much, Amber, and thank you, Ella. I think a lot of what you've talked about there in terms of Māori concepts, there's a lot that will resonate in the research that I'm going to present. So I shall just share my screen. So apparently this is a good time to present because you will be having morning tea, some of you. So I thought I'd start off with some cognitive morning tea with some happiness pie research. So Lyuba Murski and colleagues in 2005. Oh, this is saying bad network quality. Amber, interrupt me if I'm not coming through clearly. I shall just keep going though, assuming I'm all right. So yeah, so she with colleagues developed this happiness pie research, and what their research summarized was that for most people, their happiness, 50% of your happiness, which you can think of as well-being, is from a set point. So when you're 10, when you're 20, when you're 30, when you're 40, if people are reporting their happiness, they'll give a very similar response in terms of how happy they are. Or this has also been found in twin studies. So if you look at twins who are reared apart, have different upbringings, they will also report very similar levels of happiness. Okay, so that's a lot of your happiness is just how you tend to be. If you're somebody who's generally happy, you'll usually be happy. Somebody who's generally not very happy, you'll generally not be happy. But 40% of your happiness can come from intentional activities. So you can do things, you can engage in activities that increase your happiness. It might be going for a walk, it might be doing your hobby, it might be working on tasks that you find meaningful. So you can do things that improve your happiness, and I'll talk more about that later. And then finally, 10% of your happiness is up to circumstances. So there might be positive or negative events that happen that affect your happiness on a daily basis. So there was some really interesting research where they followed a whole lot of people in the United States who moved to California, and they all showed a blip, a little increase in their happiness, but it didn't last because most people revert to their set point. So one piece of news that isn't so good is the research done by Baumeister and colleagues in 2001. And they studied, they reviewed a whole load of literature from the social sciences, especially psychology, but it was a really broad swathe of literature. And their overall finding was that bad is stronger than good. So what they meant by that is when you experience a bad event, it has a much stronger effect on your well-being than a good event. So let me just talk briefly about a diary study that exemplifies this. There was a diary study by Day and colleagues in the 90s, and they asked people over 8 consecutive days to report good and bad events that had happened to them during the day and their levels of positive mood, positive emotion and negative emotion. And they found, as you'd expect, that the more positive events, the more positive mood people had, the more negative events, the more negative mood. But there was also a crossover. So when you have positive events happening, your negative mood is slightly dampened. So that's great. But when you have negative events happening, those have a stronger negative effect on your negative mood. Positive mood. So negative events have these more pervasive, long-lasting effects than positive mood. So you really do need, well, I suggest it means that you need to even more engage in activities that increase your happiness, because you have to sort of offset these more negative and enduring effects of negative mood, of negative events. I thought it'd be also nice to talk about some research being done here at AUT. Many of us experiencing a whole lot of change at the moment. And so this is some research that we've done on workplace change. This is with Paula Zali, who's a PhD student here at AUT. And the rest of us here on the top right are her supervision team, myself, my colleagues Jared Haar and Roy Smollen. And we had a sample from the United States, New Zealand and Australia of employees, and we asked them about their workplace change. And of those employees, this is about 2017, 73% were experiencing workplace change of various levels. And I dare say if we were sampling people today, it would be heading towards 100%. Of those employees, 42% were experiencing major change. So a good proportion of the sample are experiencing, really what they thought was significant amounts of change. And then the other point I wanted to make is for those who are experiencing major change, we asked them about their responses to it. And most people responded telling us about their emotional reactions. And the coloured donut on the right of this slide shows you those emotions they were feeling. So the blue 59% shows you that most of those employees who responded about strong, high levels of change said that they were feeling strong negative emotions such as confusion and anxiety. So that was the overwhelming emotion for most people, which means, again, we need to try and counteract that. And so the other ones in the circle are showing the other types of emotion that were experienced. So 80% of the samples said they were excited about change, looking forward to developing new skills. 12% were sad about the change, maybe tasks that they'd enjoyed, they were missing out on, things that if they'd had a restructure or work redesign. And then 11% were fine or okay with the change. They said, you know, I'm pretty relaxed. I've got major change going on, but it's okay. But the majority of people experiencing major change did have strong unpleasant emotions. So how can we try and counteract that? So I thought I'd tell you about the research of Martin Seligman. So he has developed what he calls the PERMA model, which is an acronym, as the ingredients for a flourishing life. And so I'll just go through those 5 elements of PERMA, which you can see on the screen here. So the P of PERMA is for positive emotions. So experiencing emotions like love, joy, happiness or gratitude. The E of PERMA is for engagement. So being happily absorbed or engrossed in one's tasks and using one's strengths fully. The R is for relationships. So being connected with others, and aroha, which is one of our AET values and Ella was talking about earlier. The M is meaning, so feeling you've got meaning and purpose in your life. And the A is achievement, so feeling like you're achieving goals and experiencing success. So if you have more of these ingredients, these 5 elements, then you are going to have a better life. You're going to be sort of being your best self, enjoying life, having a sense of well-being. And I thought I would just briefly present some research that talks about 3 of these elements, the P, the E and the R, the positive emotions, engagement and relationships. And this is research that Eugenia McGrath did with me. She was a master's student a few years ago and also with other colleagues here and overseas. And again, this was a diary study where we asked people to respond to surveys over the course of 5 days in this case. And we asked them to respond to a survey in the morning when they reported their sleep quality and the amount of positive emotion they were feeling. After work, we asked them to tell us about the workplace interactions they'd had that were friendly, sort of positive, collegial, say problem solving or having a nice, enjoyable chat with somebody, and their levels of work engagement, how engrossed they'd been with their work that day. And then in the evening, just before bed, we asked them about the activities they'd engaged in during the evening to, you know, recover from the day's work, which might be things like detaching from work, relaxing, engaging in exercise, learning something new, controlling one's time, so recovery activities. And what we were looking at is whether, you know, sort of the resources that you build up during the day have this sort of positive gain spiral. And that is indeed what we found. So people who reported in the morning having a better quality sleep experienced more positive emotion as well. And so those aspects in the morning when they first woke up had those flow on effects through the day, so that in the afternoon after work, they said they had higher levels of friendly interaction with colleagues and they felt more engaged in their work. And in turn, those had flow on effects for the evening, that people who'd had those friendly interactions, solved problems, enjoyed being with colleagues, and then felt engaged in their work, they had better recovery in the evening. Now that dashed line back to sleep quality, we didn't find in our research. It was just short of significance, but other people have found this. So I can say that on the whole, when people use evening recovery experiences well, they also then the next day have had better quality sleep, and they're set up for the next day to experience, you know, a better quality day through the day. So it's this idea of resources building up through the day to help you, you know, make the most of your day and then recover again overnight for the next day. So the final idea I wanted to leave you with, or set of ideas, is if these, since there's a lot of research showing that these 5 elements of PERMA are so useful in helping you flourish, what can you do to, you know, with those sort of intentional activities in that happiness pie research, what intentional activities can you do to increase your well-being? So one is positive emotion. So the first thing is get enough sleep, because we know that that sets you up for a positive start to the day. So try and get enough sleep. And if you have positive events, spend time savoring them. So if you make yourself a nice lunch, enjoy it. Think about it later. Gosh, I did a good job with that lunch. It was delicious. Or if someone gives you some positive feedback on a task, reflect on it. Enjoy the moment. For engagement, think about how you're using your strengths. Maybe you're somebody who's very creative and you can think about, right, what am I doing that's really creative? How am I enjoying that? Another point with engagement is you have to enable to be absorbed in tasks, you have to remove distractions. And I'm hoping that'll link nicely to Lena's work, which is going to come on next. The third one, the R of PERMA, is relationships. So how are you connecting with colleagues? Are you making sure that you are sort of putting that into your, especially if you're working virtually, that you're putting some opportunities to connect with colleagues? Are you recognizing when others do great work and thanking them for it? Or it might be you're connecting with your whānau, you know, people that might be, you know, living in difficult times during the pandemic, that you reach out to them. On the meaning side, you can think about what your work contributes at AUT, both to your colleagues and to students. And if you're doing research, thinking about, you know, what are the national and international impacts of that research that you're having. And then finally, accomplishment. So you can do things that help you feel a sense of accomplishment. So when you're practicing your hobby, or maybe learning something new, which is very relevant into Wiki Uti Māori, maybe you're learning some new Māori expressions, or maybe you fix something at home, or you've made something. So think about these activities, or I'd encourage you to think about these activities, or think about these elements and what you could do in maybe one or more than one of them to try and help you lead a more flourishing life and improve your well-being. I'll leave it there, but very happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Helena. That was really interesting, and I'm sure everyone feels relieved, like I do, to know that there's evidence saying that change is hard, because it is. So it'll be really interesting to hear what some of you know, those who are involved in watching this webinar are doing in terms of their own PERMA strategies. But clearly, it's more important than ever to prioritize well-being in times of a pandemic. And speaking of pandemic prioritizing, well, for good, for bad, and for ugly, technology has taken center stage in this COVID crisis. So how can we use technology better, both in the name of teamwork, which is arguably the embodiment of community at work, and to help us navigate it in terms of what we're doing with it at home as well. So Lena Waizenegger, who's with the Business Information Systems Department, has published new research that can help guide us in these new normal times. Lena, over to you.
Awesome, thanks so much. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you so much for the great introduction, Amber, and for your amazing speeches. Helena and Ella, I already learned quite a bit, and I now kind of take on the technological angle. I'm just sharing my screens quickly. All right, perfect. So, as Amber said, I'm pretty much looking from a technological perspective, and especially around the use of digital collaboration platforms during times of the pandemic, and how we can actually leverage the functionalities, especially in the realm of collaboration, but then also circumvent like the negative consequences. And my presentation today is actually based on one of the first international studies that we've conducted during the first lockdown, which however also has implications for the second lockdown and, well, perhaps also ones that are about to come, but especially also in the future when we are around adopting the hybrid workforce. So what we did is during the first lockdown, we've conducted interviews with 29 participants from 6 different countries, such as New Zealand, Australia, the UK, the US, Germany, and Denmark. And we pretty much asked them about how they actually now use the technology at work, but also for their private life. And how did that actually change from prior COVID to now during a pandemic. So what we saw when we actually analyzed the data, that this working from home is really, really different from traditional working from home, what we have seen in the literature. And we coined the new term of enforced working from home. But before I elaborate a little bit on this new enforced working from home, I just want to give you a brief overview of what we already know in the literature around traditional working from home. So what the literature tells us is that the results are already quite paradoxical. So on the one hand, we see quite a lot of positive effects, right? Because due to new digital collaboration technologies, we can actually work anytime and everywhere, right? Like we can work at home, but we can also work in a cafe, or we can work in a collaborative space. So that usually has quite a lot of positive effects on our work-life balance, because now we can actually schedule the work around our private schedule, for example, right? So taking into consideration, for example, drop-off times for kids, or working out. So that actually has quite a positive effect on our perceived autonomy, but also on the work-life balance. What we also saw in the literature is that due to this flexibility and also this more focused work time, that we experience an increased productivity. And then, of course, also has an effect on work satisfaction, and in the long run also on the lower attrition rate. So this is kind of everything what we see like in the positive space. But then there's also one camp that actually says, well, working from home actually also has quite a lot of negative effects, especially when you consider remote employees. They often suffer from the social and professional isolation, right? Because they're not actually in the corporate office. They don't really have the social chat, or are often only, if at all, connected through digital channels to formal meetings. They often feel kind of that they're disadvantaged with regards to their professional advancement. And then they experience this guilt. And due to this guilt of not being in the office and not showing face to their managers that they're actually working, they kind of overdo it and overwork quite a lot, right? So you see a lot of emails like coming late at night or during the weekend, just to show, okay, no, I'm actually working. I'm working really hard. I'm kind of compensating for that flexibility that you give me. And this is, again, that kind of backfires, because that, again, leads to quite a high stress level, and then kind of intrudes of our work-life balance again. But when we actually conducted the interviews, we saw, well, the state we're in now is quite different to traditional working from home. So during the first and also the second lockdown and possible lockdowns that are about to come, we actually didn't have any choice, right? Traditionally, remote e-workers actually have the choice, no, I actually want to work from home, right? But we didn't have any choice. We had to work from home all the time. There was also very few time to actually prepare, right? So for the first lockdown, it was only 2 days. For the second lockdown, it was only 12 hours. So it was just a very, very short time to actually get prepared. There was also no training in the sense, okay, how do we actually use these collaboration platforms? How do we leverage the different functionalities? So a lot was kind of like, okay, we had to learn on the fly pretty much. There was also no flexibility, because usually remote e-workers have the possibility to go to the office every now and then, like once a week, once a month, to just show and kind of collaborate again, socialize again. So this is why we coined the term enforced working from home. And this enforced working from home had quite a lot of benefits, but also quite a lot of challenges. So one of the benefits, there was one of the most dominant benefits, was actually that using the digital collaboration platforms and working from home in an enforced way actually leveled the playing field between pre-COVID-19 remote workers and on-site workers, because overnight, on-site workers also became remote workers, right? So previously, the on-site workers had like always the opportunity to gather, had like water cooler chats, had lunch together, but then also really could work very productively in formal meetings. And remote e-workers were kind of left out. So there was a bit of a different status between on-site and previously remote workers. But now, because everyone became a remote worker, everyone had to use the same communication channels. And this is what we've seen, and this is also what you can read on the slide from Wendy, and that this is the first time that she felt closely connected as ever before, right? Because everyone had the same status, and they had social chats, so they had a lot of organizations actually started to have virtual coffee breaks or virtual after work drinks, but then also the remote workers, the remote e-workers could join, right? Whereas previously only the on-site workers usually went to after work drinks, because it was a bit weird to bring the laptop in the bar, right? So that was really one of the biggest positive effects that we've seen. Another effect was also that a lot of participants actually mentioned that they feel less distracted, because now when you're working from home, also depending on your private circumstances, of course, they didn't have these walk-in disruptions from other colleagues, for example, and these ad hoc conversations. But the communication became much more orchestrated, right? So now you actually had to send a meeting invite with an at least heading, okay, what are we actually wanting to discuss, right? So the whole communication became much more orchestrated. We've also seen, because we don't have these ad hoc conversations anymore at work, teams started to have daily or at least frequent catch-ups. Those took usually place in the morning to signal a start for the remote e-workers. Okay, this is the start of your working day, right? So now we want to talk, okay, how do you feel on a scale from 1 to 5? So kind of to check in, okay, how's everyone feeling in the sense? How's everyone coping? Because everyone had has different personal circumstances, right? Some feel quite lonely and isolated. Some are actually totally overburdened because the kids are running around in the background all the time. So that was kind of like a really good occasion just to check in, okay, how's everyone feeling? But then also to see, okay, what are the tasks you're working on today? What are the challenges you're facing? Okay, do you need any help? So that actually led to quite a lot of transparency. And one of our participants actually said, well, only through this, he actually found out that 2 of his employees actually don't have enough of work, so he could then reallocate the work. So it was really good effect on the transparency. On the other hand, we also saw quite a bit of challenges, and that is with regards to the personal circumstances that everyone facing, especially people with caretaker responsibilities. They faced this phenomenon of role conflict, right? So usually when we are not working from home, we play these different roles depending on the location where we are, right? So we are an academic at work, then at home we are perhaps a mom, and then when we go training, we're an athlete. But because everything took place in the same location, we had all these different hats on. So one participant actually was telling me about that she tries to focus on her Zoom meetings, but the kid is running around in the background, the TV is super loud, she hardly can focus. So that is really important to take in mind, that we all face these different circumstances, and that should be taken into consideration also when we're looking at workload and performance, obviously. Another, and this is pretty much in line, that we've seen this blurred work and private life boundaries, right? Because now we don't go to work anymore. We actually work in our home, and we also work out in our home, and we have lunch and all meals at home. So the work and life boundaries are completely blurred. What we've also seen is that people extended their working hours, right? Because first of all, they didn't have their commute anymore, but secondly, there was no kind of cutoff date, right? A lot of participants also reported, well, because my workstation is right in my living room, so when I'm walking by and I see, oh, I have to do a task, but then I'm just doing the task, right? So this is pretty much in line with the blurred work and life boundaries. What we are seeing is that some participants actually suffered from loneliness and isolation. And for them, it was really good to have these daily check-in meetings. Another big point was with regards to Zoom fatigue. So this is what Terry said. So a lot of people in her organization actually felt, well, these Zoom meetings are just very intrusive, right? So now you actually don't check again, or do you have time at this and this point? You just send out a Zoom invite. And therefore, we appreciate it even more, because we assume you also might suffer from Zoom fatigue to actually be here today with us and having our intellectual morning tea together. And the last point that I want to raise is the difficulties to share knowledge. So this is particularly difficult for younger, especially for new employees, because new employees usually have quite a lot of questions, right? And what we're doing, not just new, but also every employee, we check, okay, is my colleague busy? We just check and see, or the person is just working quite intensively, then we can't interrupt. But because we don't have the transparency anymore, especially junior employees were quite hesitant to actually interrupt their managers or their mentors to actually ask questions, which then affected the ability to actually share their knowledge. And I want to conclude with some advice, especially when we're moving forward and adopting a more hybrid workforce, meaning that we will have some on-site workers, but we will also have remote e-workers in a very flexible manner. So having learned and having really upskilled in remote working, I think it is quite essential that meetings become hybrid meetings by default. And this is really important because that allows people to have the flexibility to work either from home or from in the office. But then if we offer these hybrid meetings, it's very important that we actually have a really good moderator to give these remote workers a voice, right? Because they're not there physically. So they actually have to be presented through the facilitator and through the moderator to be actually able to contribute to the meeting. Then this is what some organizations are doing, is especially, for example, Google, they offered to give their employees a budget of $1,000 to actually spend on their home office equipment. If we don't have this, then it's definitely in our consideration if we want to invest in an ergonomic home office, especially if we choose to work from home more extensively. And then my next point is that we need to rethink and repurpose our space, right? So previously, a lot of us worked in the office, and then our home was reserved for our private life. But now, because we have this intensifies blurring, we actually need to think, okay, how can we leverage the different spaces, right? So we could leverage the office space to actually socialize, collaborate, and innovate, right? Because it's proven that these tasks are much, much better in a face-to-face context. But then use our home space to do more of these focused works if our private circumstances allow. With regards to the effect on knowledge sharing, I think it's also important to create that culture that, especially for junior employees, that these questions are always welcomed and always allowed, and there are no stupid questions. And what we also see from our study, that if we adopt a hybrid workforce, that it's really important that we have either daily or frequent catch-ups, but they should be moderated really well. Perfect. So if you're interested in the studies, our study was published in the European Journal of Information Systems. I think these slides will be sent around, and our article was also published in the conversation. To conclude, I think it's really important, especially at AUT, because we have a very strong community in Whānau, to really work together, to watch out for each other, and really work as a team, because I think the pandemic can only be won as a team. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lena. That was very interesting, and it's just fascinating to know that you found real evidence in real time, essentially, in these crazy times. There are some really interesting comments and questions coming in, so I'd like to just spend the next 13 minutes or so, just talking about some of the questions that have come in. And I might start with Rory, who has made a really interesting comment. When I work from home, I often feel like I have to prove that I'm working. And I often feel a little guilty for things like taking the dog for a walk in the middle of the day. And he says, what can AUT management do to normalize work from home expectations? I'd like to put that question out maybe to Lena and Helena first. So of course, Ella, if you have thoughts, please feel free. And I would like to maybe hear from Rory and others about what you would like to see from AUT management. But maybe back to you, Lena. What do your findings tell us? What's the best way to deal with this?
Yeah, so it is actually quite funny because that's what other research shows us, that it really depends on the role of the manager. So if the manager kind of says, okay, we've now worked from home, we now all have to go back to the office, or even like goes back to the office, him or herself, that kind of gives kind of this pressure. Okay, we also have to go back to the office. So I think one dominant role is definitely about that, what the manager or the mentor plays and kind of which ideology he or she kind of represents. But then I think it's also really important to kind of develop some guidelines around, okay, when can we work from home, and then how do we actually interact also with the people that are working on site. So for example, as I said, with the hybrid meetings, to offer those by default, and then always give remote e-workers actually the opportunity to join and also give them a voice. But I think one of the key points is definitely role modeling, and to see, okay, how do the upper levels of management actually behave with regards to remote e-working from home, or going straight back to the office. Because if they choose to work from home for some of the time, that kind of legitimizes it. Oh yeah, I can actually also work from home in the sense. And then what is also really important when we choose to work from home, that we actually see exactly, prepare for the meeting and say, okay, these are actually the benefits that I've realized. These are possible challenges that could come up when I'm actually working from home. So how do we deal with that? Is that a possibility to work from home, and how can we collaboratively working on the challenges?
Thank you, Lena. And Helena, I'll pass over to you, but I'm just noting too that this is about the cultural shift that we need to make, and this move from the checking in as opposed to checking on or checking up, and also this idea of us working in a high trust culture by virtue of the fact that we are offsite so much of the time. Helena, what would you like to add?
I think Lena's given such a comprehensive answer, but I think one of the things that, and it touches on Lena's work, is that sort of blurring of boundaries and people working extra hours. So I think, well, one thing I do, because a lot of my work is thinking, and you don't necessarily at the end of the day, like, if I was a carpenter, wow, I've made a table, look at that. But often I'm spending a day thinking, or I've analyzed some data, or I'm it's not very tangible. So I just have a little Excel spreadsheet going, and then I just know, and you could say, what did you do on the 12th of February? And I could just go to my Excel spreadsheet. At the start, I used to record my hours, but now I just figure, look, I know I work my hours, so I don't really need to do that. I'm not, but that just helps me really get a sense of, I could tell you what I've been working on. And also for me, it's been really interesting just to see how I am using my time, and what are the things that take a lot more of my time. So, and that just helps me, if I do decide to go for a walk in the middle of the day, I can then, if I do think, oh my gosh, okay, today I'm concerned about my hours, make sure I've done enough hours, I could just keep a track of that. And I think for those, if you're like me and terribly conscientious, it just makes you feel a little bit better about it, that you've really tracked it.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah, Ella, do you have anything to add to this? With your microphone on.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I mean, I'm in the odd position of having 2 roles, 0.5 for each. And so the teaching student research side of it is fairly straightforward. I develop, I know how much time that takes. The other, my role as the director of Māori advancement, is much more nebulous because I've been trying to create activities. And so everything that I've set up this year, from the Tuakana Tena peer tutoring network, which was to be able to provide peer tutoring support for Māori who are struggling. And we know that Māori students struggle in the faculty. And so being able to just reach out to them. So no amount of additional hours in front of a computer is going to, encourage a student who's struggling to put their hand up and say, I'm struggling. So we've had literally hours and hours of discussion over the lockdown of how do you reach out to vulnerable people when we don't even begin to understand the kinds of vulnerability that they face. So the small handful of students who've had the courage to ask for help, the kinds of situations they're living in with, housing insecurity, job insecurity, food insecurity, and then digital poverty on top of that, means that no matter how well organised I am, no matter how great our management are at creating these infrastructures, we've got students living in the most dire situations. So part of my dilemma and also thinking moving forward is coming up with ways to reach out to students. We can blast them with a gazillion long emails and hour-long lectures, but we don't know that they have the digital capacity to even read this stuff, let alone engage with it, let alone live in the kind of secure environment where they've got time to think. So I think the next big challenge, whilst I've been focused in this presentation about how do we support each other as a faculty, as an institution, as a whānau of AUT, I think we're still really struggling with how we provide real, meaningful, tangible support to the disparate range of issues that our students are facing at the moment. And that, I think, has got to be the next challenge. We've already seen uprisings at other institutions. So the students are, at most institutions are 2 clicks from some kind of revolt. And I know that's not our fault, and it's not, there's a virus on, but it's kind of like I think our real challenge as teachers and scholars and researchers is working out how we next provide an infrastructure to support our students. And to be perfectly frank, I don't think we're getting a lot of direction from the government. When you've got TEC putting out different messages from the Ministry of Health, putting out different messages from the different ministers, I worry, because yes, it is important that our managers are good and proactive, but it's also, for me, important that the people who are managing the country have got a sound strategy to deal with the most vulnerable, and that we as scholars have a role through our research to actually feed into that information. So that's where my current dilemma is how do I do my job better as a Director of Māori Advancement, but all of us who are committed to improving the well-being and lives of our students when we literally don't know what's going to happen next week.
Yeah, that's of course the key point there, Ella. Thank you. And Rory, just to note, says it feels like it's a discretionary idea. What I would like to see is some official guidance and maybe policy. So that's something to think about too. Ella, I would like to ask you a question, if you don't mind, which is, what do you say to the suggestion that conversations about the treaty, about biculturalism in the midst of a global pandemic are really secondary to the focus on health and the economy?
For me, the health and economy of a nation is bound up by the health and well-being of its citizens. And we have a situation in New Zealand where roughly, nearly 20% of our citizens are Māori, many of whom do not enjoy the same access to wellbeing. So the debate, the discussion and the dialogue around how we do that better, I think, continues regardless of what's going on. And this was a conversation that was being had during the Second World War, when, the majority by proportion of people who died in the war were Māori. So we're engaged as everyone else is, as every other sector in this, but we've been having the same conversation for 170 years in our own communities, and only in the last 40 have we been able to have those conversations with a wider community. So I am not saying for one moment that treaty issues are more important than your personal health. What I am suggesting is that if and when as a nation we are really able to deal with our past, it makes us a stronger nation. It makes our citizens more robust and stronger, and I think that that's why an ongoing discussion as part of the bigger ones that are right now happening for COVID is still relevant.
Ka pai. Helena, I have a question for you, which is about what you yourself are doing in terms of these PERMA activities, and maybe you can give us some guidance for what we might think about in our own PERMA world and strategies.
All right, thanks for that, Amber. Yes, I'm doing a few things. So one thing is I know the importance of sleep, and I don't know about others of you out there, but I'm a bit of an insomniac, but I'm trying very hard to sort of have better processes at night. So I know, screen time just before bed is not very good. Anyway, just sort of better sleep hygiene, going to bed at a decent time so that I get better sleep quality and wake up for the, sort of refreshed for the next day. I also have started knitting again, which I haven't done for a long, long time. And I think I have actually spent as much time unpicking the knitting as I have actually doing the knitting. But I just thought it was something else creative, because I know that when we do things with our hands, that's really good as a recovery activity in the evening. So that's one other thing I've been doing. And finally, I've also, on the connection side, I've been trying to reach out to people a bit more. I tend to be very task focused, so I kind of have to give myself a bit of a nudge towards being better at connecting. So I'm working hard at that as well. How about you, Amber? What are you doing? Do you fit in any of those PERMA activities?
No, I tend to feel guilty that I'm not doing anything. I'm surviving.
Oh no, that's no good.
Yeah,
guilt isn't good. You're probably doing things, but you're just not reflecting on the fact that they fit within that PERMA model.
Exactly, and I think trying to just be kind to yourself can go a long way.
Try a bit of savoring today. When you have lunch, try some savoring. Get some positive emotions out of your lunch.
Exactly, I will do that. Well, we have about 1 minute left, so I want to thank everyone today for being such an excellent group of panelists and for leading such a thoughtful and thought-provoking conversation. Clearly, we have much to think about and do differently, and no doubt in ways that we would never even have imagined 6 or 7 months ago. But I guess hopefully there is some comfort in knowing that even though we all have quite unique experiences in the way we're dealing with COVID and this pandemic, that we're all in this strange new world together. So hopefully that will provide some kind of really solid foundation on which to build a strong community. So thank you. Haere ramare kia koto. Happy Friday. Kia pai tora, go well. Thank you.
Ka kite.
Thank you.